There's a lot going on the global economic scene as we speak. There's been a lot of turmoil, economically speaking, and a lot of pundits say that we should be expecting around the corner perhaps something akin to another global recession. What can we make of some of these issues? What about the question of economic nationalism, whereby countries seem to now be focusing on themselves and focusing on how to take care of their people at the expense of any other person around the world, or any other country indeed? Is this a rollback of some of the gains of international trade, which had earlier on been promised to be the way out of economic doldrum for many countries, especially even on the African region, and of course in Nigeria specifically? What do we make of this? What are the prospects for Nigeria, and how well can we stand on our own in the event that everything goes awry and where international trade seized up? Of course, we've seen scenarios whereby, production has now become based on who you are friends with in the international scene. Some of the powerful countries have even threatened parts of Africa to say, if you make friends with a certain country or the other, you too will suffer sanctions. What do we make of this? And then we'll also be looking at, how much of economic thinking should go on in government circles? How much of economics is actually going on as we speak in government circles, especially in Nigeria? What do we make of some of these issues? Lastly, what's going on with the Naira? A lot of turbulence of late, and we're seeing levels that we had never plowed before. How do we rescue the Naira? Is there any hope for the Naira? As I'd always try to repeat, according to Margaret Thatcher and Joseph Stalin, to destroy a currency, to destroy a country rather, the first thing you do is to destroy this currency or to debauch its currency. How do we save the Nigerian currency from debauchery? Joining us today to discuss this, Professor Nazifi Abdullahi Darma of the University of Abuja. Welcome, Prof.
Thank you very much, Tofi, and good morning, Nigeria.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming. I mean, we know it's not easy to get you and all of that. What do you make of what's going on the global economic scene, sir?
Well, the reality of global economic management and relationship is that of interdependency, complementarity, and strong relationship. The modern economic framework, particularly with the advancement of globalization, have made it impossible for any country to pursue its own domestic macroeconomic policy without having an implication on other countries that it relates with.
Yes.
And if you look at the major economies of the world, China, India, United States of America, Japan, any macroeconomic imbalance in their domestic economies have a reverberating effect on the global economy for mostly two reasons. Number one, they are strong importers of a lot of what is produced elsewhere. So if there is economic slowdown in their countries, it is automatically transmitted into lower demand for goods from other countries. And that will set in the process of recession in other economies. And if there is an economic expansion in the major economies, it also provides opportunity for a lot of developing countries that are exporters of their agricultural and other resources to those countries. So the world is so much linkage in such a way that what happened on a global scale cannot just remain with those global economies, but it will have implications. If you take a very deep look at what has happened due to the Ukrainian crisis, Ukraine and China, they are the biggest corridors that are producing wheat and maize in the world today.
Amazing.
And because of the lower cost of production, they have had comparative advantage of producing those two commodities at the cheapest cost relative to other countries. And that is why a lot of other countries, particularly in the Middle East and developing economies, depend on them for export. Now, with the crisis, over 20 million tons of grains have been locked off and cannot be exported. And that is why you have skyrocketing prices of wheat, particularly in the Middle East, where a significant proportion of every part of the meal of a typical Arab family is actually 50% wheat.
Yes.
So because of that, now we have very high food inflation in the Middle East. And if you look at the global economic trajectory and you do individual analysis of major developing economies, you realize that significant proportion of disposable income is spent by families on food.
Yes.
And therefore, once there is an element of the slightest element of food inflation, it fuels a lot of discontentment, it erodes disposable income, it lowers standards of living, and it precipitates political crisis and riots, particularly in the Middle East. And therefore, and once you have lack of political stability, then it disrupts production flow. And once production flow is disrupted, it triggers recession.
Wow.
So that is why political actions can lead to serious economic imbalances. The war in Ukraine is actually a political war between Russia and Ukraine, because Russia is not interested in allowing Ukraine to become a subservient or a territory of NATO.
Yes.
And because of that, the crisis started, and unfortunately, the West is giving so much arms to Ukraine rather than sitting at the table. And you see, unfortunately, yes, and unfortunately, if you look at the world history, in the last 100 years, every war that has been fought is actually settled on a peace table.
What?
Yes, every crisis that lead to a war in the last 100 years is actually settled on a peace table. So why not talk and resolve the issues rather than starting the war?
So are you saying that it's a fait accompli that there's going to be another global recession soon? Is it a phase? Is it something we should go to the bank with, or can it be avoided, or
Well, you know.
And what are the prospects for Nigeria if that happens? Where do we find ourselves?
Well, the reality is that if you have food crisis, as I said, beyond the cost of the food, it triggers political crisis. And once there is political instability, production is disrupted. So perhaps, because recently the World Bank and IMF have released projections and revised downward the prospects of economic growth globally. They have also predicted that there is likely to be recession on a global scale if the war continues. But yesterday it was gladdening. The government of Turkey have midwifed a ceasefire, or rather an agreement between Russia and Ukraine to allow for the export of the piled up stock of over 20 million tons of grains. And instantaneously the markets reacted with slight reduction in the prices of wheat and corn in the world market. So if actually this accord of allowing the export of food is allowed to go in, it will seriously dampen food-oriented inflation in most middle-income and emerging economies.
Yes, and
and then
ours is consistently over 20%.
Yes, and it will lower the potentialities of political crisis that may lead to recession. Now, in the context of Nigeria, the reality is that even in the absence of Ukrainian crisis, of course, we depend significantly on import of wheat, which, if the prices go on, will transmit into domestically oriented inflation, which we have witnessed. And with the crisis that is happening with the bakers now, that they are on strike, because the major input prices have gone up beyond maize, but the prices of sugar and the price of diesel, which they are using for production, has gone up. So, but in reality, in our country, the major food baskets have been taken over by insurgents in the northeast, in the northwest, and in the north central. And significantly, a lot of arable land that was hitherto producing hundreds of thousands of tons have now been lost to insurgency. of course, the military and the armed forces are making their own effort,
Yeah.
but I believe that we should be able to work as a team with all Nigerians, particularly the government, the three tiers of government, the federal, state, local government, and all the armed forces and traditional rulers working to find a lasting solution. Because I have on record that in Burnungwari area, a single farmer that was producing 10,000 bags of maize is not producing anything.
Nothing.
Nothing now,
Oh my God.
because of the insurgency. He's a large-scale farmer. Averagely, he produced 10,100 kilogram bags of maize. And you know, that Burnungwari area is one of the most fertile and arable areas in northwest Nigeria. So this is just one farmer which I have a relationship with. Now, you can imagine the thousands or hundreds of thousands of farmers in Zamfara, in Katsina, in Kaduna, in Sokoto, in Kebbi, that have now been dislodged from production. And the consequential reduction in the supply and the possible rise in the cost of production and in the cost of food items. But beyond the insurgency, again, we have issues that are inflationary related. The cost of fuel, diesel has increased from 230 naira just less than 6 months ago to now over 880 naira per liter. The cost of fertilizer, which hovers around 35,000, because fortunately I'm also a farmer. So I know how much it costs me to buy a bag of fertilizer. So all these are adding up to the actual cost of production for a typical farmer, and it's likely to be transmitted automatically into higher prices that ordinary Nigerians buy. And as such, we need to be proactive to take measures and see in what way we can reduce this tension. Because in Nigeria, averagely, a typical family spends over 56% based on the 56% of its income on food, based on the last household survey undertaken by the National Bureau of Statistics. So if there is disproportionate increase in the prices of food, it means family incomes will be eroded, more to be spent on food, because once you earn an income, the most important thing that you think of is to survive.
Exactly.
You can suspend every other thing, but you cannot suspend eating food.
And I think we're getting to that point where it must be, people must be informed that with the kind of economic issues we're seeing now, lower your expectation, make sure you feed yourself, postpone some capital expenditure.
Yeah.
Some of these very expensive phones that our people use a basic one so long as they hear you, because we all have to get prepared. But you mentioned, is insecurity the only problem we have with our inability to, so to speak, feed ourselves? Because it worries me that Ukraine, I'm not sure it's as big as Nigeria.
Yes.
And between Ukraine and Russia, we get about 40% of our wheat. What else aren't we doing?
Well, Tope, the reality is that we have not been too proactive in terms of what we need to do differently in order to get out of this quagmire. Honestly, for a country with a population of over 211 million people, with a growth rate of approximately 3%, meaning over 6.2 million additional mouths are added every year, which is equivalent to the population of smaller African countries. I think we need to be more thorough and proactive in terms of what we need to do in order to promote economic dependency and self-reliance.
Okay, hold your thoughts, Prof. We're going on a short break, and we'll be speaking with Professor Nazifi Darma on some very key global economic issues. Kindly stay tuned. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back, viewers. And if you're just joining us, we've been speaking with Professor Nazifi Darma on some very key global economic issues, including as they affect Nigeria. So I'll let you continue from where you ended. You were talking about how we haven't been too proactive in terms of food sufficiency, and then, of course, this security problem that we now have.
The reality is that as a nation, we abandoned national development planning for a very long period of time. If you have a medium-term national development plan, it is usually operated on the basis of input-output models
Yes.
that will tell you what are the requirements for the specific sectors of the economy and what role each sector will play. When you have figures of demography,
Yes.
of an increase in population of 3%, adding to 6 million, that should be able to tell you how much additional tons of food you should be able to produce.
Absolutely.
That is how many additional hectares of land you need to cultivate.
Exactly.
What subsidies you need to give, how much fertilizer you need to produce, how many tractors you need to have. So in the absence of that, we'll just be beating about the bush. And you see, national development planning is not just about the federal government. It's about all the types of government and people working as a team in order to provide a sustainable basis of predictable economic performance into the future. And that is why we need to change our thinking. The federal government, the state government, and the local governments need to work as a team. Tope, it is really a national embarrassment for a country with 211 million people to be spending millions and millions of dollars to be importing wheat when our arable land, particularly in the northeast, is so suitable for wheat production. And if I recall my memory very well, when I was a director in the National Planning Commission during the preparation of Vision 2020, one of the MDs of the Lake Chad Basin Development Authority, he's led now, I can't remember his name. During the discussion, he told us that Sambi supported and adjoining areas in Borno State and Yobe are so fertile and they could be able to produce enough wheat for the West African sub-region.
Wow, wow.
Now, if you look at the conceptual framework behind setting up the River Basin Development Authorities, in the last 40 years, their lackadaisical performance, we need to think differently. How can we put up a model, maybe of public-private partnership, for all the arable land under the River Basin Development Authorities and the water infrastructure and the massive investment running into billions and billions of dollars that the federal government have made? How can we create partnership with the private sector, with the relevant state government, with the relevant local government to put arable land under the supervision of those River Basin Development Authorities to work as a team in order to ensure sustainable food production that will guarantee food security for a growing population of Nigeria that is predicted to become over 300 or 400 million by 2050.
Wow.
So we need to start thinking. 2050 seems to appear to be too far away. But it's around the corner. When in 1999, we are talking about the Millennium Bug, that by the year 2000, a lot of the computers and systems will collapse. We believe that it was far away. Now, 2000 has come and passed. We are now in 2022, 22 years after. So from now to 2050, it's just 28 years. Those 28 years, for those that are healthy and Allah has given the opportunity to witness it, it will just be like 8 years. It will come. And you see, the most important thing of what makes a nation resilient to survive, to progress, is to be able to proactively think, predict the future, and prepare for future consequences. The population will expand. Nigerians will be there. Nigeria will be there. So how can we prepare for the future eventualities?
I was going to ask you, in your experience, just how much of economic thinking goes into governance in our environment here? And how much should go into it? How relevant? Sometimes I look around, I don't even see economists in government. Sometimes it's lawyers that are running the economy. Sometimes, maybe an engineer, maybe you economists are not pushing yourself so as forward. No, it's true, because some of these things, they may not come and meet you in your house and say, come and meet me, except you push. And before we know it, lawyers are running the economy, maybe even accountants. How much of economic thinking should go into government, and how much of it is going into governance in our milieu?
The reality is that in every country of the modern world today, without a strong economic base, every other subsector is likely to be in crisis.
Yes.
But you cannot have a strong economic base in the absence of proactive, predictable, and futuristic thinking. And you cannot have all that in the absence of getting people in the right places. And unfortunately for our country, this is not so. This is not the case. And we need to start thinking differently. The government recently appointed a chief economic advisor. And luckily enough, I was privileged to be part of the medium-term National Development Plan 2021 to 2025. And it is our fervent hope that the proactive initiatives that we have outlined in the plan will come to fruition. But the reality is that even if we have a national development plan,
Yes.
without corresponding and complementary effective planning at subnational level, even if the national plan is successful 100%, the federal government is controlling just half of the economy. So my appeal is for the subnational entities, particularly the state governors,
Yes.
to work in partnership with the relevant federal government agencies, ministries, and departments to see how they can collaborate
Yes.
towards implementing the key initiatives encapsulated in the medium-term National Development Plan 2021 to 2025, because we operate the same economy. The macroeconomic policy framework is the same, the fiscal policy framework is the same, the trade policy framework is the same. We operate in one economy, and without collaboration, consultation, cooperation, and synergy between the three tiers of government, there is absolutely limited impact of what the federal government can do alone without corresponding cooperation from subnational entities.
I have two more questions for you, sir. They're very, interesting questions. The first one is that what economic ideology do you think we should subscribe to as a nation? Should we be capitalist? There's politics going on now. There's a certain gentleman who said, listen, I'm all about the market forces. Let it determine everything. Maybe, I don't know what some of the other guys believe in. Or should we go to the left and be socialist and say, okay, because we have so many poor people, let's assist them. Let things be cheap. Let government control prices, whatever. Where do you stand?
Well, my personal stand is that market in themselves, left alone, have not, cannot, and will never ensure optimality in scarce resource allocation.
Wonderful.
And this is the fundamental problem in economics. Resources everywhere are scarce. So if you allow fundamentally the market, it cannot ensure optimality.
But market adherence
let me
tell you that because we have not done that.
Let me learn. It will not ensure optimality in scarce resource allocation. And I base my argument based on empirical evidence. If you look at all the developed economies that are capitalist-oriented or market-oriented, they have never absolutely allowed the market to determine everything. There's always an element of periodic government intervention.
Periodic government.
Yes. The reality is that we cannot leave the economy perpetually to the market. But at the same time, we cannot be able to operate a socialist economy in the context of modern globalization and the reality. So you have to have a mix of a market economy that is teleguided, controlled, and directed by the government. I'm speaking this word with clear emphasis. Teleguided, directed, and controlled by the government in a way that the market is allowed to operate, because the government cannot be a producer of goods and services, but the government must also regulate the excesses of the market in a way that there is no over-profiteering and then disruption of people's income lives in an attempt to make the maximized profit. This is what is happening in America. This is what is happening in Japan. This is what is happening in China. This is what is happening in every market-oriented economy you can think of. So the reality is that we must be able to develop this mixed model that allow private enterprises to operate, but with element of control in a way that we ensure people's quality of life and welfare is not eroded in the name of making the maximum profit by the private sector.
Fantastic. I will still have to bring you back on this show to explore the economic ideologies, But last question. What do we do with the Naira?
Well, so many multidimensional thoughts come to my mind when we talk about Naira. Naira is our national currency.
Yes.
It's our national pride. You cannot go to America and start spending pounds.
Exactly.
You can only spend dollars. You cannot go to any European country and start spending dollar or Europe. Of course, they change it, but everything is denominated in euro.
Exactly.
You cannot go to Britain and go to any shop and buy anything in dollar. You have to change it and buy it in euro. But the strength of any domestic currency is a function of multidimensionality of factors.
Yeah.
The first factor is how strong is the productive base of the economy of that country, and how much proportion of that domestic production is exported.
Yes.
Because you cannot live in isolation in a global economy. And where significantly, if you do an aggregate demand analysis of a typical Nigerian family, you realize that literally most of what we use daily is either imported or it has significant import component. And with a population that is growing at the rate of 6.2 million every year, without corresponding expansion in the productive base of the economy, particularly in agriculture and manufacturing, it means profoundly every year our dependency on importation is increasing, which goes a long way in putting additional pressure on our local currency relative to other internationally convertible currencies like dollar.
Yes.
And therefore, there's likely to be more of devaluation on a continuous basis. Secondly, our preference, our respect for imported goods relative to those that are produced in Nigeria. Thirdly, the absence of a coherent national industrial policy, which will strongly promote Nigeria's production of goods and services, is also a factor. But importantly, which is the worst, is lack of patriotism and speculation on the part of some Nigerians that actually lead Naira yesterday to exchange for 650 something Naira, which is bad. So I think we the elites, I'm not excluding myself, we the elites, we need to wake up, we need to change our thinking, we need to change our perception, we need to be more patriotic, we need to have a sense of belonging, because wherever you go, irrespective of whatever you accumulate, irrespective of whatever you have, if you are outside Nigeria, you are a secondary citizen.
Exactly.
It is only in our country that we are primary citizens, we are free, we can move. So let's work together as a team, particularly with the elites, improve the production capacity of Nigeria, believe more in Nigeria, and Nigeria will be better.
Thank you so much, Prof. Fantastic. And that's a good way to land today's program. And you heard the appeal, especially to the elite and also the not so elite. All of us are in this. For those in government, who you are in government, all you do is spend dollar. You have expressed lack of confidence in your country and in your currency. Anyhow, it's been a good one. Thanks for staying with us, and join us next time.